hit the record button. So, hi everyone, and welcome to our virtual session this evening with the NHS, looking at all about working in healthcare science. So we've got a really exciting session for you with some great speakers who I'm really looking forward to hearing from. But before we do that, I just want to share with you guys how you can communicate. So some of you are already using the chat box, which is awesome to see. So for any comments throughout the session, please do put the chat box, feel free to say hello. However, for your questions, just to ensure that we can get through all of them, please do pop them in the Q&A box. So you will see them along your panel, chat box for any comments, Q&A box for your questions. You can also speak directly to us, so you just need to raise your hand and then I will have the power to unmute you, so you can do that as an option as well. So who are we? So at Pathway CTM, I sit on the education team and my name is Catherine. That's my little memoji. So I will be supporting the session tonight, which I'm really looking forward to. And what I do at Pathway CTM is I liaise with all our schools and colleges that we work with across the UK to ensure that teachers, parents, and more importantly, you guys as students are aware of all the great opportunities that are out there for you. So at Pathway CTM, we really want to support you guys with your next steps. So, do reach out to us if you need that help. And well done, guys, as well for showing up tonight. So you know who we are, and we'll hear from our speakers in a moment, but let's find out who you are. So I'm just going to launch a quick poll and maybe pop in the chat box to let me know that you've done it. So you will see something has popped up on your screen. If you could please fill that in just so we know who our audience is tonight. Awesome. So people are filling that in, which is great. Great, thanks Hannah, letting me know that you've done it. Okay, and I'll give you another minute or so. Great, okay, so let's have a look then. I am going to read out the results. Okay, so we asked you which applies to you, and 96% are students on the line, which is great. We've got 3% parents, which is also great to see, and 1% other. And let's have a look at what year group you are in as well. So 71% of you are in year 12. It's great to see you guys. 11% year 11, and also other as well. So perhaps you've left school, or you could be in a lower year group. And 7%, it's going up as well. 7% are in year 13. And then we asked you guys, are you aware of what healthcare scientists do? So 31% of you have said yes, but 69% of you have said no. I'm here to find out, which is great because that's what this evening is all about. So I'm just going to end that poll there. Thank you all for filling that out. And I'm now going to hand over to Claire. Good evening, Claire.
Hi there, thank you. That's great to be here. And thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Claire Wardle and I work as part of Health Education England. And they are like the education and training arm of the NHS. So we're really excited to be here this evening. This is one event in a series of events that we've been running with Pathway CTM to really focus on NHS careers. So we're really excited to follow on from for the Healthcare Science Week last week with this really exciting event with some fantastic trainee clinical scientists. So very warm welcome to Francis, Sophie and Sam, and thank you for giving up your time. I know how busy you are. I'm a nurse by background and very proud to be part of the NHS. So I'm sure you'll sort of get the feeling over from tonight about how good it is to work in the NHS and the real benefits from it as well. So I will sum up briefly at the end and just signpost to a few additional resources, but it's really handing over to these guys really, and to hear more about the trainee scientist role. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire and Catherine. Well, it's great to be here. And hello, everyone, all the students and parents that are out there listening. Thanks for coming along, and hopefully you'll find this hour really useful and interesting. So first, I just want to say, who actually are healthcare scientists? So quite a few of you said you don't know what a healthcare scientist does. And to be honest, when I was in year 12, neither did I. And actually, if you speak to most people in our job role now as trainee healthcare scientists, a lot of us didn't really find out about it until university. So it's great that you're here to find out about it. So healthcare science actually represents a massive group of staff throughout the country. The three of us tonight talking, we're all based in the Oxford University Hospital Trust, which is in Oxford itself. And basically healthcare science is a great profession because it allows you to work in many different disciplines. You could work in anywhere area from cardiac all the way to sort of anything in genetics, or even things, you know, in immunology. It could be patient facing or non-patient facing. And something that we're very proud about is how actually 80% of clinical decisions involve a healthcare scientist. So say, for example, you go to your GP or the hospital and you're consulted regarding a medical condition. In 80% of those situations, a healthcare scientist would have been involved in helping the doctor to reach that decision. So we're going to sort of use ourselves as case studies tonight to help you understand what it's like to be a healthcare scientist. Next slide, please. So how do we become healthcare scientists or trainee healthcare scientists? So we're on a program called the Scientist Training Program, or also known as the STP. And this is a full-time program which lasts 3 years. It's a postgraduate course. So we've all done undergraduate degrees first. And then this course, basically, you're at work 4 days a week, and then you get one sort of study day. And it involves working and studying for a master's in clinical science at the same time. And the university work is either on sort of a block release basis, or sometimes some students do it 1 day a week. But it's a really good training program. It's very structured, and it allows you to not only learn stuff that's happening on a day-to-day basis in your department, but then everything you do is backed up by that academic knowledge that you'll learn during your university period. So it's great that, like, if you guys are thinking of applying for university, then you don't need to have a master's already. You don't need to have a PhD. You would just go into it from the angle of having your bachelor's degree, and then you'd be able to apply. But we'll talk about that throughout the talk. Next slide.
Hi, so my name is Sam and I'm a genetic counsellor, and I'm just going to take you through the next few slides. So as Francis introduced, the STP being a mixture of academic and work-based rotations, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about what exactly this involves. So there's quite a lot of work involved in it, but it's all worth it in the end. Throughout your 3 years, you have to do competencies to show that you're competent within your area. You also have work-based assessments, and then you've got the academic content on top. So that's your master's, your MSc. And some of the core modules that are covered through your competencies look at areas within the NHS and an introduction to the healthcare science work as well. As part of your master's as well, you do a research project, so a dissertation. And then during years 2 and 3, mainly 2, you do rotational modules. And this is just to get a better idea of all the different specialities that work within the NHS, and you get a better idea of how your role fits within a patient's pathway throughout the NHS. Next slide, please. So the aims of the STP, at the end of the 3 years, you'll be a registered scientist. So if we go back, please, thank you. And you'll be considered a clinical scientist. You'll have great knowledge within your specified area. You'll have the opportunity to diagnose and choose appropriate investigations and treatment for patients, working within a multidisciplinary team. There's always options to take part in research within the NHS. And ultimately, why we all go into this is to have a positive impact on patient care. Next slide, please. This slide is from a questionnaire that was carried out on lots of STPs as to why they've applied for this programme. One of the main ones is to get a registration within clinical science. A lot of people come from an interest within healthcare and science, so it's the combination of both that is why they've come into this position. Working within the NHS, it has all of its opportunities and benefits as well. Things like like maternity pay and pension pay and holidays and such, so you get the benefits from that as well. This is a brilliant quality training programme, and students really like the blended work of academic and then also workplace learning. Thank you.
So hi everyone, my name's Sophie. I'm a cardiac physiologist. Thank you for having me this evening, and hopefully you can take something really valuable from this session. So I'm just going to quickly really whiz through what the specialism of the STP and also how on earth do you get onto this programme. So to begin with, the STP specialisms, tonight you've got myself, Francis and Sam, and you'll see this wheel here with however many segments it's got in it, but 4 general categories, and we all come from different parts of the STP. So we are all specialists in very different areas, all under clinical science. We're all healthcare scientists, but we all have very different day-to-day jobs. And that, I think, is actually quite an exciting part of the STP and part of being a healthcare scientist, and that it's very varied. So you've got your life sciences, physiological sciences, clinical engineering, medical physics, and bioinformatics. And you can see from the, I won't go through every single one, but there are 52 specialisms. So there's bound to be something in there that takes your fancy, I'm sure. But it's, the important message here is that it's really varied, and you could have all sorts of different career paths within the STP. So go to the next slide, please. So this is a nice simple slide, really, just showing you the application process. I'm sure at the moment it's probably perhaps a bit overwhelming all about the STP, but told about this programme. As Francis said, we're going to put that into context in just a moment. We'll go through each of our day-to-day jobs and give you a bit of a case study of what it really means. But just to give you a bit of guidance, the actual application process, first of all, is an online application form, typically opens around January time. I know this is a bit in the future for perhaps most of you on the call. Online application form asks you about 3 or 4 questions, just sort of testing your or asking about your previous experience, whether that was previous study, previous work experience, and also other hobbies. That's my biggest top tip, is about including other things that you do. Something that someone who's going to read that application form is going to be like, ah, I remember that person. I don't know, they swam the channel. I have no idea. Then after that, you have an online aptitude test. These are the tests that are sort of your verbal reasoning and your non-verbal reasoning tests. They last, I don't know, about 15 minutes each. And they're really a screening process. And it's a pass-fail sort of thing. After you've done your aptitude tests, you get shortlisted and you get offered your interview. And that's a non-COVID times. That's a visit to Birmingham, and it's a face-to-face interview. Post-COVID, I'm not sure what that's going to look like. But before all this, it was a series of 4 small interviews, small 10-minute interviews, all testing different areas of your scientific and personal skills. So if we go to the next slide, please. Last little bit, there's a lot of information on this slide. I won't go through it step by step, but just to give you some context of the course requirements. So to be able to apply for the STP, you've got to have a bachelor's degree. So that's a BSc in a relevant or pure or applied science subject. So there's a whole host of degrees that applies to. If you pop it in the chat, we might be able to answer if that's covered by that. Anyway, you need to have achieved a first or a 2-1 in that degree. Alternatively, you can have a 2-2 and an honours degree with a higher degree as well. That's really going into the nitty-gritty. Other things that are course requirements, check out the person specification, as Sam and Francis both alluded to. The course is there's quite a lot to it, so you've got to make sure you're the right person for it, I would say, before applying for it. And then the other 2 things, of course, we're looking for are scientific skills, which will have come from doing your science undergraduate degree, and also those transferable skills, again, likely to have come from completing your undergraduate degree, also, as I said, from those other things you might get up to outside of studying, all transferable skills, very much applicable to the STP. So I'll hand you back over to Francis.
Right, thank you both. So so this is me, and I am a trainee clinical scientist in clinical immunology. Now, before I start, we're now going to have one of our first videos that we made as part of Healthcare Science Week. So Healthcare Science Week, this would usually be trainee clinical scientists going and standing in the halls of the hospital with stalls and sort of engaging with the public and other people throughout the hospital. This year we thought we'd have to do it a bit differently, so we got together and we made some videos to post on the hospital Twitter page to sort of promote what we do. So here's our first one.
Hello, I'm Francis and I work at the Immunology lab at the Churchill Hospital. I'm a trainee healthcare scientist, but can you guess what I do to help patients and other healthcare professionals? Let's take a look inside the Immunology lab. Welcome to Immunology. In the lab, we can test patient blood samples to help doctors to diagnose individuals with allergies and conditions such as lupus. Here we have a tissue slide which we can use to detect if a patient has antibodies that attack their own cells. Let's take a look down the microscope. This bright green pattern represents autoantibodies that bind to your own cells. Lupus is a disease that causes joint pain, light-sensitive skin rashes and severe tiredness. By helping doctors to diagnose patients with lupus, then they can start treatment on anti-inflammatory medication sooner, which leads to a better quality of life. That's just a flavour of the work that we do as healthcare scientists to help patients and other healthcare professionals. Take a look at these links to look at the 30+ specialties that you could work in. Thanks for listening.
Okay, so hope you enjoyed that. Admittedly, I did feel a little bit cheesy while doing it, but it's all part of the fun. Okay, so I'm going to talk through a little bit about what I do and what it's like on a day-to-day basis to work in immunology, and hopefully you'll learn by listening to the three of us that it's not just about lab work; it's very varied. So yeah, this is me, and if you could. So this diagram here, this is almost like a cartoon sort of version of some of the cells that make up the immune system, which are really important white blood cells. And we can look at in detail at these cells to sort of help diagnose patients. Next slide, please. Okay, so how did I actually get here? So first, once believe it or not, I was in year 12 at some point, and I was doing A-levels. And the A-levels I did were biology, chemistry, and maths, and I did an AS in geography as well. And to be honest, I chose these A-levels based on what I found interesting, not necessarily thinking about careers. I thought, what do I like now? And based on doing those A-levels, I then thought, yeah, I'd quite like to go to university. So then I chose to go on and do my undergraduate at Oxford Brookes University. And I did a undergraduate degree in biomedical science, which is the next bit, which was here. And that was a great 3 years. I learned a lot and made lots of connections. And then throughout that time, I decided to go and do work experience. Now, luckily, just around the corner from the university was the John Radcliffe Hospital and the Churchill Hospital in Oxford. So I went on 2 lots of work experience. One was a week long, where I went to various different departments that include biochemistry, microbiology, immunology, and genetics. And then I thought, yeah, actually, I really like this idea of working in a diagnostic lab. So I wanted to find out more about what clinical scientists do, and I found out about clinical scientists because of a careers talk I went to. So I went and spent a week shadowing the clinical scientists in genetics. But although I liked genetics, I decided that immunology was more for me. So I applied and went and did a master's in immunology at the University of Oxford, which was really, really interesting. And it was quite good because it gave like half of the degree was very theoretical, and then the half was very applied and quite clinical, and that encouraged me even more. And then I applied for the STP, and here I am now working at the Churchill Hospital in the immunology lab. And if anyone wants to add those up, that makes me being here about 7 years. So I clearly like Oxford quite a bit. But yeah, that was my sort of progression to now. So what is life like as a clinical scientist in immunology? So mainly what I would say is we don't deal with patients day to day. I have the opportunity to go and sit in clinics such as allergy clinics or clinics for patients with hematological malignancies, but most of the work is dealing with the samples, the blood samples from these patients. So on the left, we have an analyzer called a flow cytometer. I'm not going to go into the details because I hadn't heard of these things until a couple of years ago. So don't worry if you don't know these terms. But this is basically a machine that means I can look at all those different cells that I showed in that cartoon on the first bit. So we can look at one type of T cell versus another type of cell. I'm sure you've all heard of antibodies. So we can look at the cells that make those. And then the photo in the middle, that's the machine that we use to test for allergies. And I mentioned lupus in the video. We can use this machine to help us with that disorder. And on the right, we've got a machine that can help us diagnose patients with conditions such as multiple myeloma, which is one of the blood malignancies. Next slide, please. So immunology at my department is split into these 5 main areas, which I've sort of mentioned briefly. So we've got the allergy part, immunodeficiency. So that's when you're lacking a part of your immune system, and it might make you susceptible to maybe viruses, or a different deficiency might make you susceptible to bacteria, those sorts of things. Then we've got autoimmunity, and those are conditions such as rheumatoid arthritis and lupus, and they can occur at any age. And then we have the hematological malignancy, and we work very closely with the hematology department. So what you'll find is that being a clinical scientist in any specialty, you'll have a lot of interdisciplinary working with other departments to sort of help the patient pathway. And then finally, we have neuroimmunology, which is the area that I'll be doing my STP research project in. And now here's just a really, really short case example of something that you would be involved with if you worked as a clinical scientist in my lab. So we've got this is to do hematological malignancies, this sort of graph here. The green represents a normal person, and each peak is a type of protein. Now, as you can see, at the end on the far right, you've got this really big red peak. Now, that means that you've got a malignant type of B cell, and that's involved with myeloma. So by looking at a patient's blood, we can use this testing strategy to really help patients and doctors. So things that we do on a day-to-day basis is performing these assays, looking at the data, escalating an urgent result. So if I saw this result, I would be on the phone straight away to the doctor to get them referred and get them treated as soon as possible. But also it's about improving our service. And that's a big part of the STP research projects. A lot of us would be doing projects that enable the service to advance or make testing for the patients better. We undergo training of ourselves, but also training of our colleagues. And finally, we have the competencies that Sam alluded to earlier, which is basically documenting and proving that we can do what we say we can do. Thank you. So I'm now going to hand over to Sam, who's going to talk about her role in genetic counselling.
Hi, Catherine, would you mind playing the video? Thank you.
And thanks, Francis. Really interesting to hear your journey. So let's have a look at Sam's video.
Genetic counsellors are highly skilled healthcare professionals with training and expertise in genomic medicine and counselling. They provide risk assessments, education and support to individuals and families affected by or at risk of genetic disorders. Being a genetic counsellor means to empower patients through knowledge, active decision making and psychological support. As a genetic counsellor, I'm a good communicator, good listener, genetic specialist, patient advocate, a researcher, a mentor, a facilitator, a team player. I am a genetic counsellor. I am a healthcare scientist. Genetic counsellor.
There we go. And over to Sam.
Wonderful, so good, you'll play it twice. So yes, my name's Sam, I'm a trainee genetic counsellor, and if we go to the next slide, it will show my pathway into starting the STP. So like Francis said, I did A-levels in biology, chemistry, English, Lit and Lang and psychology, and whilst I was doing my A-levels, I was kind of headstrong in going into medicine. That's all I wanted to do, and I wasn't successful in getting in, so I went into biology at Bristol Uni, which I loved, and the reason I had this as a backup because I really enjoy biology, and it's a pure science subject, and I thought it gave me quite lot of opportunities to go on from there. And then, not shown on this slide, but between finishing my undergrad and starting my master's, I worked in the NHS for probably about 4 years, doing various different roles, from a nursing assistant to working in the respiratory lab, and then working within the breast unit as well. And during these years, I didn't really know where I could see myself going. And it was during my last job that I got involved in a bit of research to do with the 100,000 Genomes project. If you don't know what that is, I recommend just Googling it. There's lots of information online about that. And as whilst I was helping out in this research, I came across the role of a genetic counsellor. I'd never heard of this role before, but I really was attracted to the combination of learning about science. Genetics is always evolving, but also incorporating it with patients as well. So then I did my master's in genomic medicine and then went on to the STP programme. What this slide shows in the side, because I was aware that when I was doing these pictures, it kind of looked like I was going up on a scale sort of thing. And it's to say that success isn't straightforward. There's lots of little blips in between, and it's just to say that if you're not successful in something, it doesn't mean you should stop there. There are always opportunities available. We can't predict the future, like the pandemic, for example. We just make do with what we've got. So keep on going, keep on striving, and kind of broaden your horizons to see what else is out there. Okay. So my role as a genetic counsellor, it's a patient-facing role. It's split between general clinics where we see a variety of conditions. At present, there's documented about 6,000 different rare diseases. Individually, they're rare, but collectively, they're really common, and about 1 in 2,000 people has a rare disease. So it impacts the population a lot. And then there's also a cancer side of genetic counselling as well. So we see individuals with a strong family history of cancer. And the idea is we see these individuals that have come to genetics and try and establish whether they, based on their family history, we can say that their genetics is causing a certain condition or not. So for that reason, we would then order a genetic test based on what we think they're presenting with, relay that information back to them in their results, and this may potentially impact their management and their treatment, and maybe opportunities to go within research as well. So there's a real there's a jointness of between counselling provision and also information given as well, and helping patients through their journey in a sensitive and mindful manner. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks so much, Sam. And Sophie, shall we go to your video?
Yes, please. Thank you very much.
And hopefully it's interesting, students. It definitely is for me to hear how different, everyone's background is, and in terms of how they've got to where they are today. So let's have a look at Sophie's video.
Wonderful.
Great introduction, and let's hear more from Sophie.
I'll be back. I think my iPad just froze a lot, but there we go. Thank you. Perfect. So I'm Sophie, cardiac physiologist, and that's me, and that's a very embarrassing photo. So let's go to the next slide. So what is cardiac physiology? I get asked if I'm a physiotherapist all the time, and the answer is absolutely no. I'm a cardiac physiologist. So physiology, perhaps a term you've heard of, perhaps not. Physiology is the study of the structure and function of something, and in this case it's the heart. So as cardiac physiologists, we are assessing the health of the heart, and we're specifically looking at the structure, the electrics, and how the blood flows through the heart. Common problems that you may or may not have heard of, these sorts of things. A lot of our patients present to us with chest pain, perhaps an indication that they're having a heart attack. Shortness of breath, palpitations, so you're getting sort of flutterings in the chest of your heart beating a bit funny. And other sorts of things that we commonly do as cardiac physiologists will be involved in the deployment of stents. So the picture on the bottom right-hand corner, that's a balloon and a stent going into the coronary artery after someone's had a heart attack to make sure that blood flows nice and supplied to that muscle. Or alternatively, we might be involved in the implantation of a pacemaker, which is the image at the top right there, which is to help someone's heart beat a little bit more normally. So if we go to the next slide for me, please. So day to day, as a cardiac physiologist, what we do, we are performing diagnostic tests for people with heart conditions, and we're also treating people with heart conditions. I'll run through a few example tests in just a moment, but there's a whole host of tests that we are trained and we are skilled in. And as a result, we work as part of a big team. We're heavily involved in working with doctors and nurses very closely, and we're very much part of the team here, and we cover patients all across the hospital. As physiologists, we are considered perhaps experts in our field. So as we're the specialist in the cardiac area, people come to us for expert advice. Perhaps not me just yet, as I'm still a trainee, but maybe in years to come. And perhaps the most important element of my job is to be able to provide excellent patient care. So I see patients all day, every day. So it's really important to have those people skills, to be able to communicate different things to different people at all times throughout the day. So that's the most important thing for me. So if we go to the next slide, just to give you a flavour of a few of the tests that I do throughout the day. So the first one that'll pop up, this is an exercise test. This is very much looking at how the blood flow and how your heart works during exercise to make sure it's adapting properly. And the next one, we've got an echo. So this is an ultrasound scan of the heart, very much like people, I'm sure, have seen images of people having baby scans as an ultrasound. It's exactly the same, but just on your heart. And we're looking at the structure of your heart here. Next one, we've got a nuclear scan. Again, looking at the blood flow through the heart. We give you an isotope injected, and we look at the blood flow in your heart. Next one, we've got, this is our bread and butter. This is an ECG. An ECG, you may or may not have heard of, is an electrocardiogram, and that assesses the heart rate and rhythm. So you stick lots of stickers on your chest, which we love doing as physiologists, and then we see how your heart's beating. And the next one we've got, this is a pacemaker check. So you see the lady holding a ring over the other lady's left-hand side of her chest. That sits over the pacemaker and allows us to see into the device and see how it's working. And the final thing we're involved in, we work in the cath labs, and we're involved, as I said, in deploying stents after or perhaps during people having heart attacks, and also deploying pacemakers as well. So if we go to the next slide, I'll tell you how I got to be in this very wonderful job.
It's all right to ask you, sorry, Sophie, it's all right to ask you a quick question. Out of all of these tests, do you have a favourite?
So I do. I have two favourites. So my background, I had a bit more experience working in sports physiology. So the CPET, or the exercise test on the top left, is very much my my comfort zone, I should say. But I'm very much edging my training towards pacing. So I'll be involved more in the labs, which is the top middle picture, and the bottom left, implanting pacemakers and checking people with pacemakers. So that's a waffly answer, but somewhere in there is my favourite test.
Yeah, always interesting to hear. Thanks, Sophie.
So how I got to be here, again, very similar pathway to Francis and Sam. I did A-levels in biology, chemistry and music, and I did AS level maths. Very similar to Francis again. I chose things that I was really interested in. And I wasn't interested in maths, hence I only did AS level. And I carried on with music, and that was a good choice. Whilst I was doing my A-levels, I was very lucky to get some work experience in a hospital. It was just a few odd days here and there. And I was very, in my mind, I really thought I was going to apply for medicine. And when I went to do work experience with the medics, I found out that's not what I wanted to do. It was on the same, it was the right sort of area, but I knew it wasn't quite right. It wasn't quite what I wanted to do. And I was adamant I wanted to do a science degree. And so off I went to Manchester and I did a BSc in physiology. And I did a degree with an integrated placement year. So in your third year of your degree, you leave university and you go and work full time, completely separate your degree. And I was very lucky to go and work for GlaxoSmithKline, which is a pharmaceutical company. And I worked in the Human Performance Lab, which, as I said, is where I get my sports background from. So at the Human Performance Lab, we worked with elite athletes and we tested them to see how their physiology was doing and what we could do to improve it with their training. After my bachelor's, I went into the master's. Again, I still didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be involved with people and I knew I wanted to do something with science. And I still had never heard of a healthcare scientist. And then during my master's degree, I heard finally, I heard what they were. And that's when I applied for the STP and I was very lucky to get a place on the STP. So if you just click the next slide, another little arrow should pop up, hopefully. Yay. Okay, so I must stress here that although I did a bachelor's and I did a master's, they're not required for the STP. There are so many other ways in to becoming a healthcare scientist. As I said, for the STP, yes, you do need a bachelor's, but it doesn't have to be physiology. There's many other options out there. And also, you don't have to do the STP to be a healthcare scientist. There's many other ways, which we'll talk about in a second. There's people in my department who have done many different routes, including apprenticeships, the PTP, which is the practitioner training program, or they've come from a BSc and just done in-house training that route. So I must stress, this is not the way in, it's one of the ways in. So if we go to the next slide, I'll just take you through a few top tips for applying is work experience. And I know particularly at the moment, given COVID, that's a really tricky thing to come by. And I really hope that in the coming months, things will start to ease and hopefully getting work experience will be easier. But my biggest advice of work experience is just ask. The worst thing that someone can say is no, or they don't reply. And then, okay, fine, you've given it a go. Ask, just ask. Make your application eye-catching. As I said, including those little details that might just make you memorable to someone. Particularly for the STP, they receive thousands of applications. So if you can include something on there that they're like, oh, that person was interesting, they did something, it might just help you get through. Talk to current healthcare scientists. Well, you're all doing that already because we're all here tonight. Understand the job role, what it really involves. Yes, I had a good day today. Of course, there are bad days. And just get a feel for what really working in the NHS really means and if that's something that you're up for. I am so proud to work for the NHS, but I'm very glad that I took the time to get to know the job role before I applied. And then also something to really remember in your application, if you do go on to apply, is to really big up the NHS core values in the Constitution, because that's what really all our training is based around, is becoming NHS advocates and the future leaders of the NHS. So I think on the next slide, we've just got a few links that you, I'm not sure if we're going to share the presentation or what we're going to do, but the few links here of other alternative ways to work in healthcare science. As I mentioned, the apprenticeships is a big one. If anyone's got questions on that specific to cardiac, I'm happy to answer questions on that, as I was speaking to my fellow colleague today, who is an apprentice, and she gave me the lowdown on all the requirements there. But there's many other ways to be a healthcare scientist, as you can see here. But visit the National School website and they'll guide you through other ways. And I think that's us talking. I'm sorry we've rambled on, but I guess we'll take any questions. Thank you.
It's great, and thanks again, Francis, Sam, and Sophie, for sharing, your route to how you got to where you are today, and also seeing your videos. I found that really interesting, and we've had lots of questions. So now is the time that we can answer your questions, students. So thank you, everyone. But yeah, overall a great insight, and just to reiterate, how everyone's route is always different, isn't it? So never sit there and think, oh, I haven't done this, haven't done that. Oh, don't worry, because everyone is different. And as you've heard from Francis, Sam, and Sophie sharing their routes and their stories. So let's have a look at some questions. Claire has already been typing away, which is great. But before we kick off, I just want to ask, actually, and let's, I'll start with Francis first, so you can be prepared. You obviously knew then a passion, you had that passion for sciences at A level, but what advice would you give to students who perhaps have already picked their A-levels and it might not be, you know, related to what they might want to go on to? What advice would you say for those students?
Well, it's an interesting question, and to be honest, I think something that I learned while doing my degree is that, well, actually, no, let's take it one step before you're doing a degree. Is actually, it's amazing what different combinations of A-levels you can use to get onto a different degree or any sort of degree out there. One of the quick questions that quickly came up in the chat was, do you need to do chemistry? Well, no, because some universities you won't need to do chemistry for the particular degree that you're applying to. So, for example, my undergraduate degree required that I had an A-level in one science, but it was preferable to have more, but it didn't mean I had to do that. So I think it's really important to remember the flexibility. And it's also really important to remember that you can change if you're going down a heading that, you know, and you're trying it out, and initially you might have thought it was a good idea. There's nothing wrong with taking a step back, having a bit of a reflection and thinking, actually, this isn't for me. And then maybe seeing if you can, you know, change the degree you're doing. I've had friends who started on a degree in, you know, biodiversity and ecology, and then they changed to do medical science instead. And it's amazing, you know, even when you're halfway through your degree, it's fine. Like you can use the modules you've done at uni and transfer it to something else. And on top of that, like for example, one of my colleagues in my department now, he did a bachelor's degree and 2 master's degrees. And now he's started working here, and he's now doing top-up modules around the corner at Oxford Brookes, so that he can now work and progress in his career in this profession. So there's always time to change, and there's always a lot of flexibility. That's what I would say.
Yeah, that's great. And I don't know, Sam and Sophie, if you've got anything to add to that. Feel free to jump in if so, but if not, no problem.
Only thing I'd add to that, I'd reiterate what Frances said, is that I always have in the back of my mind what my mum always says to me. My mum's in her late 50s and she's an accountant by day, but she always tells me, she's like, I'm not sure I want to be when I grow up. And she says that now, and she's in her late 50s, and it's never too, and she's always changing her ideas. Although it may at the moment seem that you must make your decision and that is it for life, that's not the case. It's flexible, and this is not it. You can always change. So I'll just reiterate that really.
Yeah, no, that's great. And actually, Sophie, I'll stay with you actually to ask a question. Someone has asked, can you do further studying after the STP in your specialist area? Now, you mentioned that in a year's time or so, you might be more qualified at a certain thing. What does that look then in terms of the further studying?
So with cardiac specific, and I'm sure it's the same for other specialities as well, once you've become a registered clinical scientist, you can then take your exams, which are with the registered bodies. So for example, I was mentioning about the pacemaker, being a specialist in pacemakers, I can after this take an exam to be a fully qualified pacemakers cardiac specialist. But also apart from that, more general for clinical science, there is also another program called the HSST, and I can't remember for the life of me what it stands for. It's Higher Specialist Scientist Training something, and it's essentially the equivalent of a PhD whilst working full-time. So there's the PTP, which is the bachelor's equivalent, there's the STP, which is what us three are on, which is the master's equivalent, and then there's the PhD equivalent. So that's working full-time whilst over 5 years maybe completing a doctorate. So there's always further study, and then after you complete the HSST, if you do, it's not compulsory, you're then considered a consultant in your area. So you're not a consultant, you're not a doctor, you don't just magically become a doctor, but you're a consultant, and I would be a consultant cardiac physiologist, for example.
Okay, thanks, Sophie. Let's come to you, Sam, in terms of applying and, you know, interviews. How were your interviews and how did you feel? Was it scary?
So I didn't get through the first time, so I worked on where I could improve the second time, and I was fortunate enough to get some feedback back from my first round. Was it scary? It was. I'm not going to lie, it was scary. But second time I went in there, upon reflection, I tried to calm down, because when you're in that nervous state, you don't come across as your best self. And the biggest thing I got away from it is just be yourself. Just they're looking at the sort of person that you are. You've already wowed them with your application form, and they've got all your wonderful qualifications. So you are suited for the job. They just want to see how you are as a person. So just be yourself.
Great advice. Thanks, Sam. Francis, I'm going to come to you. I think it was something you had touched on in terms of the elective modules. Someone has asked, what is covered in the elective module of the STP?
That's a great question. It really is, because the elective module is one of the things that I'm most looking forward to as part of the STP. The elective is a module which has 3 learning objectives. And I'm going to stress how broad they are. The first learning objective is something along the lines of do something that develops you professionally in a relevant sort of area. The second 2 learning objectives are present that and then reflect on it. So basically it's an opportunity to go, I'm not going to use the word wild, but it's the opportunity to sort of think outside the box and think what would be a good experience for you to learn more that would make you better at your job and better overall, like do professional development. I'll give you a few examples. I'm really interested in point of care testing. Now, this is something that everyone will be familiar with because all of the little lateral flow COVID testing, that's all classed as point of care testing. It's not something that really exists for immunology. Immunology is typically very lab based. And I'm particularly interested to think, well, could you maybe take the test outside the lab and take it to the community? And in particular, I'm thinking further afield in countries where there's less access to healthcare. So countries such as maybe South Africa or rural parts of Australia. These are just a few examples. So you don't have to stay in the UK to do your elective. You could go wherever you want. I will mention that you have to fund it yourself unless you can get funding from a research body. But you really can just try lots of different things. And typically the elective is sort of 4 to 6 weeks, but you don't have to do it all in the same place. You could do 2 weeks here, 2 weeks there. So it's a really good opportunity.
Well, that's great. So where do you think you might be then for yours?
Well, I had a meeting probably a couple of months ago with we mentioned it. You get a training supervisor in your department. So I had a meeting with my training supervisor a few weeks or months ago, and we have a few contacts with people in Cape Town, for example. And I think that'd be a really good opportunity to go over there, learn how they do healthcare science, and then see if you can sort of push it into the community and sort of develop routes. I think that would be a great way to not only maybe help their service improve, but also bring some things back to your own service to help your own department improve.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, wow. It's all exciting. Thanks, Francis. Let's come to you, Sam. And guys, you might all want to mention actually how COVID has affected, but someone has asked, how has COVID affected all of you as healthcare scientists? Well, let's start with you, Sam.
So as you can see, I'm working from home. And I'm at home most of the week. So currently since April last year, we haven't been seeing patients in person. We've set up almost like Zoom consultations, which is really important so you can see the person that you're talking to during the counselling session. With things how they're going at the moment, we are optimistic by the summer we should be able to see some patients in person. But yeah, COVID has definitely made us realise that you can work in different ways. It's not to say that working from home is a bad thing, and actually we've seen some positives out of it, and it's just being flexible when faced with some difficult situations.
Of course, and from Sophie and Francis's video, you guys managing to still work, but obviously at a safe distance and with your masks as well. So I guess it has affected all of you there. Thank you for that. Just to confirm how students can apply, don't know if anyone wants to answer this. Can you only apply for the STP once a year? Yes.
Yeah, so I'll briefly just touch on it. So the application process is once a year, and as I think Sophie mentioned earlier, it opens typically in January, and then you write your application up. It consists of answering 4 questions basically, and one of the questions is about the sort of core values of the NHS, which is why it was one of our top tips. It's really important to have a good understanding of what the NHS is about. But you apply once a year. But there are other routes in. So, for example, in my department, there are people that are biomedical scientists, and then they may choose to sort of transfer. It's I've forgotten the actual specific term, but yeah, they can do additional training to turn into a clinical scientist, which gives them slightly different responsibilities.
Perfect. Thanks for clearing that up, Francis. I wonder actually how, well, two questions. First off, can you change your STP specialism? And secondly, I wonder how you guys got to choose where you are. So firstly, can you change your specialism?
So that's something that I'm not 100% sure about, but I think there is some flexibility. So as Sophie showed with that sort of wheel diagram, there are sort of 4 distinct areas which the different specialties fall into. Now, in my first year, I did sort of what classed as like first year rotations, and that took me to biochemistry, immunology, genetics, and hematology. Now, in that first year, there was also a commonality in the university courses. So anyone who was a trainee for immunology or hematology or biochemistry were all in the same lectures together. So that meant that actually in that first year, I could have changed any one of those specialties. Because we were all doing the same teaching, we were all doing the same rotations. So I could have swapped to those. I'm not sure how easy it is, or I'm not sure how you would go about it, but I do know that that is a possibility. Moving to a slightly different specialty, like for example, if I wanted to change to Sam or Sophie's specialty, I think that would be more difficult because I have very different previous qualifications and also experience.
Thanks, Francis. And just to confirm with the application, do you apply through UCAS?
No, not through UCAS. It's through a specific portal. I believe it's called Oracle, and you can find it through the National School of Healthcare Science website. It takes you through there. But no, it's not to do with UCAS. And I've also seen a lot of questions come up about the BMAT. The online aptitude tests are not the BMAT. Unfortunately, they are completely separate. And again, it's all through the portal called Oracle, and it's all a confined application. It doesn't relate to UCAS, BMAT, anything like that. It's its own entity.
Perfect, thank you. Let's have a look at some of your hardest challenges, and I'll open this out to whoever would like to answer. So someone has asked, what is one of the hardest challenges you face during your whole journey, and how did you overcome that? I don't know if anyone can think of an example.
I can think of a very key example.
Go for it.
Actually, and it sort of relates a little bit to how you asked earlier about how COVID has affected your sort of journey. And it was actually what we're sort of towards the end of March. It was about a year ago actually, when the first sort of lockdown happened. My sort of first year rotation was put on hold. I came back to my sort of host department, which was immunology. And there was a week when, so bear in mind, this was my first year of training, not particularly experienced were in great detail with any of the tests that we were doing. And I was working on the allergy section, which is where I'm working now. And one day I was on my own, and we were doing 12-hour days at that point because of a social distancing rota that we were using. And I remember being on my own, and I remember we have 3 analyzers that perform the tests on my section. Throughout the whole day, each one of them decided they didn't want to play ball, and they stopped working that day. And I just remember being on the phone for quite a while to engineers, to other people, being like, what do I do? And I think that's actually a really key part of the application and the sort of interview process of the STP, is that it does tend to sort of fine tune and sort of find the people that can sort of deal with that and tolerate that, and how we can problem solve. Because by the end of the day and the next day, things got better. I started to iron out problems, started to recover, as it were. And I must admit, although that was one of my hardest moments, it was also one of my most enjoyable moments. And it's definitely the moment that I learned the most in the last year and a half of this so far. Being plunged into that sort of situation where it's like, you're the only person that can sort that. And what you're going to do about it. And that's when you really learn and you progress. So I found the responsibility really exciting. And also in the end, it all worked out great. Yeah, we got through all our patient testing as usual.
That's great. Thanks, Francis. As you say, it's one of those situations where you have to then think on your feet, but then you learn from it, don't you? And you move on and take that experience.
Absolutely.
I just remembered actually, Sam, you had in your video, you spoke about transferable skills, and you're saying that, you know, what your strengths are, you're a good communicator. I wonder, did you know that about yourself when you were at sixth form? Did you know much about your strengths and what you were good at?
No, not at all. That was only came out when I was working within the NHS, and I felt as though I had a really good rapport with patients. So certainly, yeah, through working within the NHS and just life experience as well, you pick that up.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I guess that's just to, you know, reiterate students, you might have watched those videos and be like, oh gosh, wow, you know, I want to be like that one day, but I'm sure you guys will. And it's about, as you say, Sam, you know, finding out about what you're good at. And yes, you know, Sam had mentioned she's a good communicator, and so maybe something for you guys to think about, because then you can, that might help you with your application, and in terms of what area you want to focus on in the future. I'm conscious of time. Thank you so much, everyone, for all your questions. I'm just going to pick out a few more before we do wrap up. But of course, guys, if we don't answer all your questions, you know, you can get in touch with us and we can follow up with you. But where has it gone? Here we are. Just to confirm then, in terms of the hospitals that you work with, so do you get to choose which hospital you work at, or do you have to relocate, or are you assigned one? How does this work, and does that depend on your speciality? I don't know who can answer that one.
I could give that one a go if you like. The answer is sort of yes, 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 and yes to all of those. Yeah. So as part of the application process, once you've been on your application form, you rank your preference of which hospital you'd like to go to, and the hospitals on offer to you are specific to the hospitals that had a post available in your specialism. So for example, for cardiac, there were 35 posts available in the country from our year, and I ranked them all as like my preference. Number one, I want to go there. Number two, blah, 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 blah. And then based on how well you perform throughout the whole application process, you get assigned accordingly. So the person who scored the best gets their top choice. Then the next person gets, and it fills in like that. So it's all a bit of a game, I guess, on picking places that people maybe don't want to go to as much, or whatever. Being flexible, that's the number one thing. But it might mean you need to relocate. Yes. Also, yes.
Thank you. Also, Sophie, just to stay with you, you had mentioned apprenticeships. Some students, I've seen a question has asked around apprenticeships, whether you do this at college. How does that work? Can you do that after A-levels?
Absolutely. So again, I only really have a knowledge of cardiac apprenticeships, but I imagine it's similar across the board. The lady in my department who's an apprentice, she did her A-levels. And for cardiac, they required a biology A-level. If you don't have biology A-level, you can then do an access course to gain that qualification. And then you go to university to do a BSc in healthcare science. And alongside doing that bachelor's, you work as well. So it's very similar setup to the STP. So it's one study day a week where you do your bachelor's work, and the rest you're working in the hospital. I guess the difference between the STP and the apprenticeships is the level, what we call banding in the NHS. So it's your pay grade really. The apprentice is more of an entry level, as you've just come from college or from school, and the STP is as its master's level, you're a few bands higher. That's the only difference. And obviously in the training you're getting more specialist in the STP, but the apprenticeship is the entry level way, and you can get in-house training all the way through, but you do your bachelor's on the side.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm again, we've got a minute or so, but I do know that there are some further resources which we will share with you after the session. And Claire, did you want to touch on this?
Yes, lovely, thank you. I just wanted to stress that, you know, if you love science and really want to make a difference, and it's fantastic to hear from our panelists and their experience. And again, it's a very specialist role, but you know, if people are thinking about nursing or working in another setting, there are a variety of roles related to science, and you could be working in a ward, in a clinic, in a pharmacy, opticians. So if you love science, there are so many careers and roles out there. So I think it would be really useful to have a look at some of our resources, both from myself and the panelists, to have a look at. So Health Careers is a fantastic website, lots of information there, both in sort of traditional academic routes to careers, more vocational routes, apprenticeships. And that's the beauty of the NHS. There are a huge variety of roles. You know, you're working in some fantastic teams. And apprenticeships, I had a look on the HASO website, and there are over 60 related to science for apprenticeship standards. So again, you don't have those student debt necessarily. You can be, as I think Sophie mentioned, you can be earning and learning at the same time. So fantastic way, but lots of resources there. So for the science apprenticeships, I just thought it might be easy to put them all on one place there. So you can do an apprenticeship from entry level. I think Sophie mentioned you could do sort of GCSEs and then come in and do assistant level 2. Lab technician, I think someone was asking about a lab technician role. And then you can build your way up through the level of apprenticeships that are normally funded through your employer up to the healthcare science practitioner, the degree program. And then there is further opportunities for higher level study at level 7 masters. So Skills for Health website, that's HASO Skills for Health, is great. You can do a search. You can do a search term just for science, and then it'll bring up 60 different standards that are science related. And you can then have a look at and think, what are my strengths? What do I enjoy? And have a look at those in detail. And the resources here, there's lots. It's quite a busy couple of slides, but if you're interested in working in the NHS, you can also look at NHS jobs, to the second link down there, and you can register for any alerts for anything related to perhaps science. There's apprenticeship guides, there's further information about programs and apprenticeships within science. And I think on the next slide, I've put some information about the Institute for Apprenticeships, because T-levels are coming. It's a new technical education program, so you might just want to have a read up about that. Again, I've mentioned about Health Careers, having a look at the different roles within science, and a little bit of information about STEM programs and work experience programs. And I do appreciate it's a really tricky time at the moment. So do have a look. There's some opportunities there that companies are starting to offer, and trying to engage with schools and colleges to try and bring young people in to offer those opportunities. You're on mute, Catherine.
Thanks, Claire. Sorry. And
Okay.
yeah, for sharing that. And students, we will share those links with you, so you do have them. I have put in a type form, so we really appreciate your feedback from this session this evening. And I just want to say thank you, everyone, for all your great questions. It's been really good, and you know, it's great to see so many of you logging on this evening. Of course, thank you again to our panelists, so Claire, Francis, Sophie, and Sam, for sharing, you know, a little insight into what you guys do and sharing your knowledge with us this evening. So thank you again. Thank you all for turning up, and we will see you soon.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Catherine.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, you.